Well, let's continue the discussion in the breakout groups. Yes, thank you very much. That was excellent. So I hope everyone is inspired now. Maybe your creative juices are flowing and you're thinking, oh, we should try this, or what about this? And now is our time to kind of break out into those breakout groups, because what would a workshop be without a breakout session, right? And we decided to do this by, well, 6 different shoreline types. So based on the registration survey that we sent out prior to the workshop, this was where kind of the greatest interest area and alignment with work focus was. So we have coastal wetlands, low bank, I believe that's bluff over there, artificial hardened, beach and dune, and then baymouth barrier groups. So we'll just ask that you kind of, wander over to the group of your interest, and we're going to be asking 2 primary questions. First, what are some demonstration project opportunities for this particular shoreline type? This is a really relevant question. This is something we've had a lot of in our interactions with stakeholders and agencies and so forth. There's been this recurring need for more demonstration projects. How do we evaluate, the ecological benefit of these things? How do we look at what the performance is and how it holds up according to some of, according to our engineering specifications or what have you? All kinds of questions we can ask around this, and demonstration projects are a great opportunity to really try out some of these things and to try to get some of these answers. And then secondly, what information or resources are needed to maybe inform where projects should go, or to inform a better, more systematic approach to implementing and promoting nature-based shorelines. So those will be the 2 primary questions. So let's have fun with it. Just have a good discussion, nice focused discussion on your shoreline type, and we'll regroup in just a little under an hour and do a breakout reporting session. And I just also, I know we're a little bit behind schedule, but don't be worried. We built it in, so we will definitely be out by 5, if not earlier. All right, feel free to break out into the group.
All right, so we had a group composed of DEC folks, somebody from ENE, Wisconsin, and I think myself, Department of State. So we kind of did a bit of a brain dump, and we started with identifying what kind of bluffs were we talking about. And we decided we would talk about clay tail bluffs in Lake Ontario, and these bluffs range between 2 to 60 feet. We thought we would kind of narrow that down into more of the low bluffs, because that's mostly what we deal with. So I guess the key thing we spoke about was how are we going to incorporate nature-based into our bluff stabilization, and we talked about vegetating the slope. That's only one element though. The other element is toe stabilization, and we felt like it was a bit more difficult to get completely nature-based with that. We do a little bit more of some kind of rock toe protection. We talked about some other technologies like a gabion blanket. We talked about other options, including dolos with plantings. Those are kind of these larger interconnecting structures that we maybe could put some plantings in there. Some of the other things we spoke about were trying to get a large demonstration project, if that'd be possible, in Lake Ontario, where there's larger swaths of publicly owned land. Also trying to get groups of maybe homeowners together to work on a demonstration project. We talked about where the money's coming from as well. Some of the needs we identified were better understanding of habitat value and habitat trade-offs, and then different kinds of options for either applications coming in for new structures. Can we incorporate nature-based features into that? Also, can we adapt an existing structure to maybe add more nature-based features? Another thing we spoke about was whether or not we can leave certain bluffs in their natural state and let them erode, and what kind of would determine whether or not hardening was even necessary. I covered the most on that page. And then we talked about partners just briefly. State parks, again, they own some property along Lake Ontario. Support from the regulatory agencies, we specifically mentioned OGS because of the state-owned underwater lands, and a lot of times there's limitations on structures in the water. Also partnering with different NGOs, maybe for some funding, for some grants. Municipalities as well are critical, as well as contractors and some of their technologies and manufacturers, and the Army Corps for expertise and funding. So that was kind of like a everything, but covered a lot of ground. Any questions?
All right, next up, low banks. We have a speaker for that group.
Hello, I'm Jennifer Dunn, and I'm bad at microphones, but I'll do my best. We were all over the place with low bank, but we did use the term victim a lot. I think it's because we were a dramatic group, but it seemed suitable. We went back and forth deciding what exactly was meant by low bank. Was it a meandering stream? Was it on a Great Lakes coast? And we decided it could be both, but we did seem to focus on Great Lakes. Even though we had Chris from Division of Fish, Wildlife, and Marine Resources, who was really worried about trout. The reason we use the term victim at low bank is because humans like low banks. We can go into the water, we can see the water, you can put a dock there, but Eric pointed out that it's also a wildlife interface. So as the term critters was used earlier, I'll use critters. They can crawl in and out there. And if humans put up a big flat wall on a low bank, it's no longer a low bank. We talked a lot about private land and the special concerns there. We had lots of folks from DEC. We had Flood Hub, and Flood Hub really focuses on working with private partners. So they were speaking about the methods they use, and it's basically handing out information. So we stole a piece from Pete's presentation and talked about literal shed. Using what if CHA could use a literal shed with special research for each individual literal shed to apply information to the landowners, just to give them the best bet. We decided maintenance is okay. If you're not going to put up a giant wall, you have to accept a little bit of maintenance possibly in the future. But I was also told that if you put up a giant wall, there's maintenance anyway. So everybody will be fine with that. More with private partners. We thought if there could be, with our literal shed, get all the people that live in that literal shed to a meeting and give them this information and allow them to ask questions. It could be a good method of outreach. And I think that's all we had. And then we ate cookies. Oh, we did pick 2 spots. Long Point on Chautauqua. Long Point on Chautauqua has a low bank and it's eroding, correct? This is what State Parks has told us. So we were thinking maybe that could be a demonstration project. And Hilton, where's Beth? Hamlin, Hilton. That could be a possible example community to try to get together to do a literal shed approach. Is that good enough, Shannon? I have to face her in the office tomorrow, so should I do that?
I'm really not that scary. Coastal wetlands. You're up. Oh, okay, no more. That's good.
Yeah, I just took notes on paper. So we started out our discussion with talking about what are coastal wetlands. And we defined them as the wetlands that are influenced by the lake water levels or the connecting channel water levels, at least part of the time. And so that could include wetlands back in the embayments, as well as the ones directly along the lake shore. And we identified a number of needs relating to coastal wetlands management. One of the first ones that came up was the need for a best practices manual for planting emergent and submerged vegetation. The purpose of this manual would be to provide information about what species work best for various substrate and physical conditions. And there's a lot of this knowledge out there, but it's kind of centered on a very limited pool of people that have implementation experience. So there's a need for greater dissemination of that information, a need for a forum to connect the people working on those things to other people working on similar types of projects for what works, what doesn't work. One of the things that was mentioned in that discussion was three-square bulrush, which is apparently a plant that's extremely wave resistant. It can serve as a pioneer species. Other plants can come in behind it. There's also a need for long-term follow-up monitoring on the coastal wetland projects. For example, we've had a number of channeling and potholing projects. They're all relatively new. We're looking at doing more channeling and potholing projects. But there's questions about how these function over time, the sustainability of the projects, how they meet the long-term objectives over time. And that's something that the direct funding sources for the projects often don't fully cover. So a recommendation that came up was that projects should have a public education component. It's very important to have community involvement in project development. A project won't be successful if it doesn't have that local champion, that local partner working on it. So we can talk about managing things on a landscape scale, but really it comes down to working with local partners to do the things that matter on the ground to that community in that place in that specific location. For projects with a public education component, that can serve as a catalyst for public action. An example was given for a project, I think it was out in Michigan, which was a Phragmites control project. But half of the project, rather than being Phragmites control, was actually public outreach and education. So the project could serve as a catalyst for educating the public about ways that they can take action on their land to control Phragmites. And another thing that was brought up was that the coastal wetland project should have public access components. It shouldn't just focus on habitat restoration. There should be a way for humans to access the wetlands as well, to see the restoration on the ground, to see what a functioning coastal wetland looks like. Because, in the end, when we're talking about GLRI funding, that all comes back to taxpayer dollars, and the ongoing support for the restoration effort comes back, to connecting people to the work that was done with this money to restore the wetlands that they care about. So that's what I've got. I had to compile my notes fairly quickly. Is there anything else that I missed that people in the group would like to mention? I guess we're good then.
Alrighty, moving around the room to Baymouth barriers.
I'm Tom Goodwin with the Monroe County Department of Planning and Development. I facilitated this session. And we had a lively discussion as it relates to outlet channels and barrier beaches. And it's a little bit of a, I guess, a unique situation because especially where there's a navigational channel involved, sedimentation is as much or more of an issue as erosion. But we have both issues around the bay. And it's a situation where there's a goal of protecting the public use of that outlet channel as well as public, private, and nonprofit property. So we came up with a number of potential demonstration projects, one of which is Port Bay. And Paul Way from the Port Bay Association is here. He wants to talk about a situation near the outlet of Port Bay.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I sort of hijacked the meeting. I'm an engineer by training, so I sort of moved directly to solutions. So I sort of focused our group, at least initially, on the Port Bay East Barrier spit. We really are looking at an active public and private use in Port Bay. It's an embayment that is protected by a spit that has eroded over a period of time to the point where it's probably no wider than these two tables put together, and with enough freeboard above high water, maybe 2 feet. And against the forces of Lake Ontario, that gets breached reasonably frequently. Most recently in Hurricane Sandy. In Agnes, it was there were some. It's DEC-owned land, but there were squatter cottages on the spit. It was much wider in those days. Those mostly got wiped away with Hurricane Agnes back in '72. So yeah, we did sort of focus on a potential demonstration project. One of the things that became clear was we really need to understand the erosion processes, and it wasn't until I was sitting in the seminar today that it really, we talk about the project and we look at historical photographs of the barrier bar, and it has moved, it has migrated obviously over the years. But one of the things that could possibly have contributed to this, and it points to the need of understanding the processes, is that about 15 or 20 years ago, the western portion of the barrier bar was reinforced, and I'll say in a more traditional, or what was sort of state of the art maybe 30 or 40 years ago, which was really just loading it up with armor stone and creating a very hard edge along there, and that hasn't moved in many, many years. And then in addition, the west side of the channel that accesses Port Bay was constructed into a state boat launch with sheet piling and a jetty that extends, not far, maybe 50 feet or so out into the lake, pointed in a northeast direction. Well, it wasn't until we were talking about this today that it occurred to me that then our problem on the east bar is east of the channel, that hard surface of the armor stone and the jetty is likely pushing the longshore currents and the sedimentation and the sand deposits out into the lake and away from the barrier bar. So certainly understanding what's causing that erosion is an important factor for us. We've already been working with Seagran, and we hopefully put down $1 million, but more likely, we're hoping for some seed money, $25,000 to $30,000 of seed money. But these are the types of things that we need funding to, or any project that's looking like this needs funding to move forward. It occurred to me, as again during the presentations today, that some of the work that's been done at Braddock Bay is very similar to what might need to be done at, or that is going to be done at Braddock Bay. Port Bay might benefit from it. However, it was pointed out to me that really the reason for Braddock Bay, one of the driving forces behind the funding, was the ecological benefit of recreation of the wetlands, and that's not necessarily the case here at Port Bay. But we do have a lot of private property, a lot of public property. There's certainly economic benefits of establishment or strengthening of the barrier bar, and and it really would be a good example of a potential public-private project to move forward with that. We also talked about Sandy Pond at the east end of Lake Ontario in Oswego County, and some of the things that were mentioned earlier today, the erosion aspects there. And I don't know, Tom, do you want to pick back up on that, or I'll keep shooting with that? Okay, so we were talking about the again, community engagement that would explain and explore the reasons for the sand migration and issues associated with that. One of the other aspects that we thought would be beneficial was if as you have like for example, a core project, or this used to be true in my past work in working for municipalities in the engineering field. We're very good at capital improvements. We're very good at building a project, getting a project built and constructed, but we're not real good at following up the long-term impacts and how really is the project faring afterwards. So there's a whole toolbox of improvements, not only for the barrier bars, but for other types of nature-based shoreline improvements, that it would be nice if there was a clearinghouse, and I think we volunteered the New York State Sea Grant as possibly that clearinghouse, but that's without authorization we did that. But it would be good if there was some sort of an overall clearinghouse that could help with monitoring and really saying, yes, this type of project works in this area, and things like that. So that was sort of that, and then we ate cookies too. So thank you. Questions?
Eat more. There's still more back there. There's lots of fruit too. Next up is Beach and Dune. Beach and Dune group. We just have 2 more breakout group reports.
Right, we had Beach and Dune, so we came up with lots of projects, so you can just throw your money in the hat that's going to be on the way out the door, so we can start working on these. We kind of came up with a number of public projects. East Lake Ontario Dunes, Crescent Beach near Sodas, Woodlawn and Hamlin Beach State Parks, and Coles Creek State Park. And there was, we kind of started off talking about public opportunities, but there was a lot of discussion, and I thought a lot of merit to that public-private partnership, or even looking at public on its own. So in regards to Lake Ontario Dunes, there was the partnering of, again, public and private, because you do have that mixed use in that area. And John provided a couple of good examples where folks who have private lands and protection of the dunes were willing to put structures on so that people would stay off the dunes, and that would be a protective measure. And then those folks become really good advocates for some of these projects. And that's what we want to try to do, is to not only recognize that the public is interested, or for public lands to do these projects, but where we can get private entities interested and willing to have some demonstration projects. Again, sometimes they can be our greatest advocates to sell this to the large populace. Another opportunity for that may exist at the state parks, looking at private landowners who lie adjacent to those properties, and again, coupling and doing a larger project along that span of the shoreline. Some of the things that we talked about, the pluses, minuses, what do we want to consider? We talked about having multiple locations, having distant locations, because you want to have you want to ensure that you're reaching that large audience and that many people in the state are able to see these various demonstration projects, rather than putting it all the way out on the eastern side of the state, and then the folks in the western part never really get any kind of exposure or awareness of it. The public and private, we talked about pluses and minuses again with that. The private folks can be advocates. They also are the ones that, in regards to the contractors, and skip down, we had a couple of specific permit actions where contractors were willing and property owners were willing to make some modifications to what was originally a hard structure for protection, and they were willing to do kind of a hybrid and do a mixture of some hardened along the lower bluff, but then they did some terracing with vegetation. And so it was a nice mixture, and it's possibly, you know, some of those projects that already exist that we could use as demonstrations, and also that the contractors that are working on these are kind of getting that exposure to some additional means and methods and just a different thought process. And that kind of came into the context of one of the things we really need to do is that culture change. Because contractor, you call the contractor, and they're going to say, okay, well, I can put in some stone or I can put in a wall, and that is really what they know and what they're selling. So we need to kind of get that mindset change. Project inventory, and this kind of goes to that big picture of resource inventory. When we're making decisions on an individual project, we need to have our eyes wide open and understand what the implications are of that individual project on the larger shoreline. And so having some kind of inventory that we can rely upon both before in the decision-making process, but also kind of on the back end, and actually have an idea of what projects are being approved, what's being authorized out there, so that we can look to those, and maybe some of those are the examples of what to do and then what not to do. Info sharing, social networking, you know, a lot of, there was some frustration here in the group about where do I start, who do I call, who has to be involved, and then sometimes there's conflicting goals of different agencies or different entities that are involved, and how do you get everybody on the same page? So we talked about is, and I heard, let's see, should we nominate Seagran again for, you know, maybe done, all right. We're going to keep you, this is, you know, kind of job security for you also, right? And kind of, do we understand the big picture? New term that, you know, that I take away today is the literal shed. And so I think it's wise. We talk about watershed. It has those same applications. And then one big thing that there appears to be a great deal of data that has been compiled by the ITC as part of the Lake Ontario water level study, but that data does not seem to be accessible. And unfortunately, it could really be useful to inform a lot of decisions and help people in some directions. So Tony's going to provide us with their data when?
Some of that's already happening. Fred Bucky from Region down here. Some people, I don't know why they didn't know we had it or what happened, but Keith from our office has been signing off information. So this group, for your purposes, not only will that happen, but another thing we're trying to do, and it includes many of the models we already talked about, and others, Tacken and others that we made, we're trying to put them all in one spot so that this same kind of thinking is one spot. Editor, you know, the supercomputer, Keith and I will know about that too. But, you know, give us some time. What we want that to be is a tool for snapshots. You know, we're going to be running models all the time. That's not what this is about. But for information purposes. And so we're going to try to do a better job as we now understand your goals better to share information. If there's anything else, let Craig go or Seagran.
Very good, thanks, Tony.
Sure.
And so I'm going to reach out to my group to see if there's anything else that they wanted to plug in. All right, very good, thank you.
All right, moving on to the last breakout group here, we have artificial and hardened shorelines.
we started our group, and I looked around at all the other tables, and we had a lot of people at our table, so we have a lot of notes, but it's all good stuff. Artificial headlines and hardened shorelines. We kind of looked at two different things. One were just some general ideas, and one were ideas for research or things that we could look at going forward, so I'll pop into both of those. But there were two big overarching things that seemed to come out of everything we talked about. The first was the need for some kind of guidance document for the public, for somebody who wants to go and do something other than a hardened shoreline. What else can I do? If I don't want to put a breakwater on my property, what other choices do I have? So a manual of some kind that gets into that was one big piece. And it seems like that some of those are already out in existence. And the second was examples of successful projects, and like either pictorial inventory or actual ones near your neighborhood, someplace where you can go to and see it and walk at it and say, yeah, that looks good, I'd like to do that at my property too. So, and we came up with some examples of all of those things. The first piece that we came up with was example potential project was the Buffalo waterfront at the Bethlehem Steel site. There's some additional research issues involve ice shear and what's going on the nearshore bottom condition in those areas. Just how does that all lay out? At Dunkirk Harbor or Dunkirk Shoreline, there's a lot of broken concrete along the shoreline. Are there some opportunities to do something a little bit different at that location? There's also changes to existing structures to increase ecological benefits, just a general idea out there. And one idea that the Corps has done a little bit of research on was taking the blocks, the concrete blocks that we would go and use for creating break walls, and putting some texture into those, using different molds that creates a texture, and that allows algae to grow in there, and it actually turns the breakwater green and gives a little bit more food for fish. So it's just another way to do these in a more green way. The other piece was looking for small-scale projects, something that would, all of these numerous small-scale projects, death by 1,000 cuts, as it was mentioned, these cumulative impacts. A local property owner looks around and looks at all their neighbors and says, oh, looks like our hardened shoreline's my only choice. Well, how do we make it so that they have some other options to see, to look at, to think that this is a better idea? And specifically, the homeowner wants to know what can be done on a small scale and what can be done inexpensively. Are there grant opportunities to help with that, to let's have a number of small successes out there to try to get something that people can get to within an hour or two and see another successful project and try to showcase some of those? And sometimes the property owners, they're well off and they're willing to try something different. They're willing to try a new idea, especially if maybe they go to the top of the list for getting a permit through. If they're trying to do something new or innovative that works in a different way, maybe that's a way to reach out to them and get them to say, yeah, this is something I want to try out for. A couple example opportunities of how do we put something out where people can see it is at the Hamlin Beach State Park. The drawings that were done in the 1970s may have been state-of-the-art there, but maybe they seem a little too big now. Maybe there's other ways to do things out there where we can showcase some different alternatives for people to see. Also at the federal breakwaters, there's opportunities to do different types of research there. And one of the big things is, all that structure is out there, but there's very little vegetation on that. When you have migratory birds coming through, how can we do something different there? And the one thought that came out was at the root, where that structure meets the land. There's a little bit of land there. Maybe we could expand the land that's there. Maybe you could do something different there. Maybe you could do a little bit of different transitional shoreline stuff there. Plant it, put shrubs in, put things in, make it a place for good food stop for the birds on their trip through, as opposed to when they go out and land on the stone and they don't have anything to eat. Maybe that's the end of their life. They can't get back up again. So give them some good structure out there and good habitat. Also fisheries along the backsides of those. Are there ways to add structure or other components that will help with spawning and foraging for fish, incorporated in the breakwaters, the federal breakwaters that are already out there. At the St. Lawrence, Niagara, or New York Power Authority, there's FERC funds out there. There's impacted areas upstreams of the Power Authority. There's opportunities to find local projects that we could try doing different things at. Usually the local owners come to the Power Authority and they say, I just want to put some riprap out there. Power Authority can fund the local owners, property owners, to do land, or to take care of the lands in that area. Specifically, a thought was at the eastern shore of Coles Creek State Park to reshape or plant the berm, the breakwater, do a redesign. There's nothing growing there now, but maybe there's a way to showcase something else that could be done at that site. There's also a pilot project at New York State Parks. So when a permit applicant comes in, they could go and take a look at some of the state lands and say, oh, here are some opportunities where good practice has been applied. And again, the idea of this handbook, of having a design manual that maybe gets into the soil types, the planting plans, shows different types of solutions that can be done to help improve the shoreline. And there's a couple examples out in the Watertown area of where people have done violations, and they've already installed riprap. Well, they have to take it back out, do the tear out, and they have to replace it. And they've replaced it with things that are good solutions. So there are good solutions out there that people can go look at. And they've replaced it with core fiber logs and vegetated, and they have to do monitoring as well. But this could be a showcase for people to take a look at. And Stephanie Larkin from New York State DEC in Watertown mentioned those examples. In terms of permits, there's quantitative impacts to habitat are needed, so that if we need to be able to say this is the problem, this is what the cause is, and then we'll be able to say, okay, now we can have a conditional permit to add and justify the habitat improvements that are needed. So by quantifying what the issue is, it makes it a little bit easier to say, okay, this is what you need to do to do a better job. So we can put that as a condition in the permit. There are a lot of permit requests that come in for vertical structures. All right. We want to showcase some different ideas where you have vegetation and shoreline demonstration projects. Do examples again at state parks and show the best management practices there. An issue comes that people, when they look at the high mean watermark, all the work stops there. But maybe we can showcase some examples where you go above the above that mark. You have some other vegetation through those areas. You throw some good examples of buffer areas. People will say that, they'll like that, and they'll say, yeah, I want that on my property too. Again, Hamlin Beach State Park came up as another opportunity to do something like that, to showcase something. And also the High Tor wetland management, wildlife management area. There's lots of areas with fishing access where there's steel sheet piles. Maybe those could be redone to have something a little bit better than that. And also at the Region 8 facility at the Twin Cedars environmental area, there's a lot of eroded areas where people have fishing access. Those can be replaced and repaired, and some things to do to manage the geese at those areas would be beneficial as well. And another one is another demonstration that would be great is a well-designed pocket beach. Maybe there's a groin that's too long. The groin that's too long at Hamlin Beach. Maybe we could improve that with some dunes and swales and do something else. So there's seems like a lot of opportunity to do something at Hamlin Beach. And then we got into the manual again. We said, are there any existing examples out there? And so the first one that was pointed out was the Vermont has the Lake Champlain Shoreline Stabilization Handbook. Somebody had that. You hold that up in a second here. Ontario They have some examples out there. Okay, that's the Vermont Handbook on Shoreline Stabilization. Ontario, there's the Fowler's toad is a threatened and endangered species. So there's a homeowner's guide or shoreline homeowner's guide to managing your property for the Fowler's toad. But you could do that for any other aspect that you wanted to, and give people some good ideas about how to manage their lands better. There's a lot of information out that Tony mentioned about from the IJC about sediment budgets and the rest of that, which I think we're going to do a little bit better trying to get that information out. The LAMP, there was a question, Don Zelazny, there was a question on the, is there a species habitat limitations as part of the LAMP? Is there any documentation on that? I think that was the question.
There's no limitations, but the LAMP, the Lakewide Management Plan, it has a biodiversity conservation strategy. And that strategy is identifying high priority or target species and target habitats, which EPA is focusing some of their funding on.
So again, getting some of this information out and the links to all these different resources that are out there that can help people make better informed decisions is kind of the key. U.S. Department of Agriculture has the Shoreline Stabilization Manual. Virginia Beach has a GIS mapped recommended techniques. So you go in, you show your project location, and it tells you, it does all the analysis and does all the things and tells you these are some suitable ways for dealing with your shoreline. There's some other, at www, I can't remember what this abbreviation is for, but it's HRNERR, has a shoreline demonstration website. Detroit District has a shoreline techniques memo that's out there on the web. There's the Great Lakes Oblique Imagery website, and but the New York State Department of State, New York State DEC has expanded that, so they have a little bit more information out that takes advantage of that information. There's the Lake Ontario Shoreline Structural Inventory, I think was done as part of the IJC work, and USGS and TNC are potential partners to work on different projects, maybe some of those roots of, at the roots of some of the federal structures to try to create a little bit more bird habitat, fish habitat there. And then the last piece was SAGE is out there. It's a system approach to geomorphic engineering, and it contains a number of best management practices out there too. So there is a lot of guidance out there, but it seems like it would be great to have a New York State manual or at least website that kind of gives you a little bit more best management practices.
Hey, Craig?
Yeah, Don.
Quick question. Was there any discussion in your group about soft engineering for the toe of some of these, hardened breakwater areas?
Not exactly. There's one more comment came up, was just, in front of, behind, and on top of the breakwaters. Are there ways to do things on top of the breakwaters? We put some different structure in and created some turn habitat along some of the sides we have as well. But could you, on the toe, maybe put some softer material on the back side or on the front side and plant that? And I think there's some opportunity to do some of those types of things as well.